Hello everyone, Alistair Gold here. Yes, it's one of those videos, one of those starts, because that was abysmal. It was so poor, and I can already feel myself starting to get a bit annoyed about it. And the reason for that, do you know what? It's mostly for the fans that travel to go and watch that rubbish. You know, the TV scheduling, they didn't care about the fans going to the game. 8:15 kickoff, knowing that there's no trains to get back from that. So either people are going to have to drive or stay over. But they did, and those Spurs fans were magnificent. Honestly, there was one point towards the end when I looked across at them and they were still singing. In the final minute, team were 2-0 down, had no chance of getting back into it. They were singing their hearts out. Do you know what? Man U fans were kind of ironically jeering them, but actually, you could see as they kept going, some of them were actually standing up to applaud, and it wasn't sarcastic. It was just fair play. Fair play. I don't know how you're still applauding when you've had served up that utter rubbish. So yeah, honestly, hats off, hands up, whatever I was about to do there in a complete mess, to the Tottenham fans that travelled, because they were superb. They really were. Because it was a night when Spurs were utterly indebted to Hugo Lloris just to stop it being an utter embarrassment out there. And because of him, no one, anyone who essentially didn't watch the match, whether it be in the stadium or on TV or some stream or whatever, everyone outside that will have just seen a 2-0 scoreline, assumed that, Spurs sounds like quite a tight game, maybe just a couple of deflected goals or one deflected goal maybe. They would not know the full story of a game where Hugo Lloris was so good that he's prevented it being 6 or 7-0 on the day. He is the only player for me that deserves any credit in that starting 11 last night. Honestly, they were that bad. I've seen some people saying afterwards that just don't want to know about Hugo Lloris being good, and some people say, "Oh, there were shots he should have saved." No. Some of them, yes, there were kind of routine goalkeeper saves. Some of them were superb reaction saves. And put this into context, he had 28 shots Man United had at Spurs goal, 10 of them on target. 19 of their shots in the first half alone was sent at Hugo Lloris's goal. I can remember off the top of my head him making at least 5 top draw saves in that first half. How it was 0-0 at half-time, I have no idea. Oh, this is so annoying, having been able to be quite positive about Spurs after the Everton game and where they're going. And look, they are still third in the table. And even if they were to mess up against Newcastle this weekend, they would still be third in the table. So don't worry. This isn't going to end with all doom and gloom and all is lost and all this sort of stuff. It was just a very, very, very poor night at Old Trafford. But there's a lot of things to be picked out from it that I think need to be looked at and considered kind of going forward as well. Because that was awful. And it was 0-0 at half-time. And to be honest, these are the kind of games, even with that amount of kind of domination of a game, where luck can play its part. But for me, often you have to earn your luck. And other than Lloris, Spurs didn't earn their luck at all. So when Fred had his shot and it deflected off Ben Davies, it was utterly deserved for the rest of those 10 players out there that ball rolled into or bounced into the bottom left-hand corner or whatever it did into the bottom corner. I think what annoyed me most was just the lack of belief, and you just felt it. Literally, the opening minutes, it was a bit like, okay, they started well, and then just reverted to type. There's just this feeling around it. Speaking to some people around Spurs in the week, and you just get this feeling that they look at the calendar and there's certain games where they think, oh, well, we lose them every year. Whether it be going to the Emirates. And I'm as bad, I admit, entirely. You'd have heard me say in these videos how much I don't like the matches at the Emirates, and you just know that anything's a bonus, any point's a bonus kind of thing. And the same at Old Trafford, that 6-1 aside, and I remember Bale scoring there, and Eriksen, and obviously Lucas Moura. The more I speak about it, there's been more at Old Trafford that have been positive. But it's always a tough place to go, is the way to put it. Stamford Bridge, of course, is the other main example alongside the Emirates. And it's just annoying, I think, that there's almost this kind of sense of defeat before they get there. And that kind of descended for me into Lloris's performance, because top goalkeepers in the top teams, they are top goalkeepers because they can go through a match without much to do and then suddenly pull off a world-class save, showing how great their concentration is. Lloris's performance last night was like a goalkeeper of a smaller team going to a bigger team. Like a goalkeeper having just a ridiculous amount of to do in the goal. That was not, for me, a team who are sitting above United in the table going to United, and a team that have finished above United in recent seasons going to United. That was what I think frustrated me a lot, and no doubt fans as well. But it is, other than Man City away, Spurs just go away to these big six teams and there's almost an expectation that they're going to lose. And it's just wrong. It's just a really, really bad mentality. And this performance I felt last night was very similar to the one at the Emirates. Very similar indeed. Kind of really lacklustre. Like the one match you kind of feel, or one of those matches where you feel everyone should be up for it. Look, Guesty and I were covering the match last night. We went out and if you're not aware who Guesty is by now, Guesty and I do the podcast, Golden Guest Talk Tottenham. We both went out before kick-off, before the fans were in, and we looked out across Old Trafford, and both of us kind of got that little feel like, yeah, this is a class stadium. You could feel the history of the stadium. You can feel why it's such a kind of arena for people to go to. But the other side to that is that players should be going, like Spurs players should be going to that place and wanting to give everything because they're on that big stage and knowing what, everyone's looking at them essentially. And there are so many things within this performance, whether it's players, whether it's things that Conte said or did, that just make it all the more annoying. It really does. And I'm winding myself up just talking about it because there are so many things that should have been done and weren't. Like I say, the fans were not thought of whatsoever, the travelling fans. And they got to watch this game when it was a performance lacking in everything that makes a Conte team look good. And it was instead highlighted everything that can go wrong to make it look dull and turgid and negative. But the thing is like, I don't even know if Conte's tactics were set out to be that negative and defensive because Spurs players didn't do anything. As in, I can't definitively say that the plan was to sit there and counter-attack and sit defensively, blah, 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 because ultimately every time Spurs got the ball, pretty much they lost it. They gave it away. So I don't know what Conte's tactics were. I may ask him in the press conference tomorrow, but I don't know whether he'd said to them, no, I want you on the front foot, but they were just so poor in possession, that never came to pass. And then what happens is the more and more you lose the ball when you're trying to go forward, the more you give the ball to the other team who then come at you, they dominate, the crowd got on your back, and you end up becoming a team sitting back. I don't know. Because I obviously social media full of, quite rightly after the game, that was awful, what another horrific watch, we play such terrible football, all of that. And that, on the evidence, was quite right. That's what you saw. But I don't entirely know. I can't confidently say that was Conte's game plan, was to sit back and try to catch them on the break. Because nothing actually happened from the players to suggest either way. It was so bad. And so many big players were so bad on the day as well. Players that I've been praising week in, week out as well. Yeah, it was dreadful. Look, the three foundations of a Conte team are essentially hard work, repeatedly doing the simple things right so that the whole system works, and the creativity coming from those flanks. That's the way it always works. But last night, Spurs were outworked from the first whistle by United. Every second ball pretty much was won. 50-50s were won. Aerial duels on the whole were won as well by United as well. Then Spurs failed to do those repetitive things you meant to get right, the basics. They failed to string a series of simple passes together. There were times when, like an Eric Dyer pass to Matt Doherty that was just played in front of him and out. And he was 6 foot away from him. He was so close. And he wasn't alone. Højbjerg was doing that. And the control was letting them down. The likes of Basuma, Bentancur and Højbjerg in the middle just couldn't control the ball. Højbjerg and Kane both gave the ball away 3 times in good situations with bad touches. I was looking up the stats. That's poor for players of that quality. It really is. And on top of that, we're talking about the wings, and the 2 wing backs barely able to create anything. So put that together, and what have you got? A load of rubbish. That's what you got. Not bibbidi bobbidi boo, bibbly bobbly poo, perhaps. That was so infantile, but I enjoyed it. It just came into my head, and it absolutely was stupid. It was so bad. It was so bad. It really was. This is what Conte said to the first question at the press conference, which I'm not sure if the guy was from Sky or not. It was just the generic, what did you make of the performance question, which wasn't me for a change, which was quite nice. We have to be honest, and United deserve to win and deserve to get 3 points. They started the game very well and created chances to score. In our side, we didn't start the game and it was really difficult, also because we made lots of mistakes. Simple. For sure, not a good game for us, but I have to be honest, and first of all, especially with my players, this was not the first time for us. Despite the table being good, but every time we played a high-level game, we struggle. We struggled against Chelsea because we drew after 92 minutes, but Chelsea dominated the game. And with Arsenal, we lost. And today against United, we lost. For sure, when the level is high, we're going to struggle. This means we have to continue to work to try to improve, to work on the pitch and to work outside the pitch. And I think for sure, because sometimes I hear that we are title contenders and I think we need time. In only 10 or 11 months, you cannot pass from 9th place to become the title contenders a year later, especially when you finish 20 points less than the monsters in England. We don't forget last season United failed the season, otherwise United has to stay for the story, always in the Champions League. On our side, I repeat, we need to be disappointed because you can lose. You can lose this type of game, but in the same time, we have to show much more because I think we can do much better than today. And do you know what? Just what a difference a few days makes, because ahead of the game, a couple of days before, Conte was telling us, I'm really enjoying, looking forwards and relishing this test against United because it's going to show us where we are. You can see excitement on his face. And then after the game, it's like a game against a monster. Oh, I don't like this monster thing. I get, from a financial point of view, yes, I get what he's trying to say, that they're financial monsters, as it were, and Spurs, have to play catch-up, essentially. But I just don't like this image of like the David and Goliath thing where Spurs are this little plucky team. I'm going to talk about that a bit more later, so I'm not going to get into that too much now. But I don't like this. Spurs are a little kind of timid animal up against the monster. That's creating this narrative where they can kind of find excuses within. There's no excuse for what happened last night. That was just a dreadful performance with a lack of desire, lack of hunger, a lack of fight, and not doing very simple things that footballers should be able to do properly. I'm sorry. That's nothing to do with taking on a monster whatsoever. It was rubbish. Utter rubbish. The only thing that was I guess amusing, but not amusing in the sense of what it resulted in, is that you can pretty much guarantee that every time fans and media are in unison over something that needs to happen, or a manager has to change his ways and do something they want him to do, it always is rubbish. In this case, it was the 3-5-2, which we all thought was going to be the right formation to play at United. Again, the players essentially stuffed it, but it just looked awful. And it took me back to, do you remember when we all desperately wanted to see Højbjerg, Dembele and Lo Celso play together in a 3? And it was like, it makes sense, it's going to be beautiful. And then they played in a European game, maybe someone against someone like Lask or something, and it was dreadful. They were playing against players that, with no disrespect to them, they should have been walking them off the pitch, essentially walking around them with ease. They were rubbish. You're going to hear me say rubbish a lot today because it really was. So I do find that always quite amusing, that sometimes the thing that we think are the best really, really, really aren't the best. They're absolutely awful. And Conte will rightly say, and he always should, that the 3-4-3 worked very well for Spurs, got them into 4th place, and it hasn't done too badly for this season because they're in 3rd. But obviously, we wanted to see more. We want to see more control in the midfield, and we wanted to see that midfield 3 work, and it just didn't. It was terrible. The 3 of them really didn't work at all. But how do I put it? He'd bluffed before the game. He'd said about doing I prefer to use the 3-4-3, and I'll use the 3-4-3. And he didn't. He used the 3-5-2. I don't know whether that was some clever, cunning tactical surprise. It didn't work, other than, first couple of minutes maybe. If they managed to grab a goal, perhaps it had. But yeah, it didn't at all. But a lot of those players out there, key players, big players that have played in, I've said this before, Champions League finals, won Champions Leagues, World Cup winners, although he was very good, played in World Cup finals, played in European Championship finals, won leagues, won cups, won whatever. They got into this match, and a lot of them looked like debutants, like nervous debutants playing for the first time at Old Trafford. It was... I would think that a few of those will watch that back and they'll be a bit embarrassed. I would hope so. And you know what? I'd hope there's some apologies as well. I hope some of these players maybe go, I haven't looked, to be honest, recently. I looked very quickly after the match and there wasn't much out there. And certainly Conte didn't do it. But I'd hope there's apologies. Apologies for those fans that made that journey. Because, they spent a lot of money to go and watch what was served up. And the players just didn't respond with any degree of performance that respected what the fans had gone through to get up there. You can tell I'm not happy about this one. Yeah, I'm not happy at all. So I asked Conte, my first question was just essentially asking, like, why? Why is there this fear? Why are Tottenham, a side that, have had a good recent history as well, and obviously have got a great history way, way back in the day. Why are they going to teams with this fear in the Premier League at the moment? And he said, that in this type of game, I think you need to arrive and don't make big mistakes, and you need to arrive with a great concentration and with great focus ready. You need to arrive with a war inside of you, a sporting war. You need to arrive in this way with the war inside of you ready to fight a war, and you have to know that at the end of the game you die or your opponent dies. I think today from the start there was not much under this aspect. I like the fact that he clarifies it's a sporting war and no one was actually really dying on the pitch. It's always a bonus. He uses the war analogy a lot. Because kind of essentially that's how he played as a player, always with his battling kind of side to him. And he doesn't like it if he doesn't see that in his players. And he didn't see it last night at Old Trafford. He didn't. I'm trying to think of any players out there. The likes of Romero, even he wasn't really battling. He was just kind of being a bit reckless. Let's go through the back three. Eric Dyer. I've given Eric Dyer a fair bit of praise this season because I think he's kind of matured a lot in certain situations. Not last night. It was a performance full of mistakes, bungled attempts at things like clearances, being caught out of position. It kind of set his stall quite early on. He went to make this clearance and sliced it completely and just knocked it about a couple of yards into the path of Man U, who were absolutely surging up the pitch. He's 28 years old. He's England international, back in the England squad. He's meant to really be the leader of that back line, standing in the centre of it. He looked as nervous, if not more nervous, than most of the other players. And that's no inspiration to those around him. To be fair to him, he took two very powerful shots to the face. One that I thought had broken his nose, it hit him so hard. So whether that affected him at all, but I would say he was making mistakes before those, so I'm not entirely sure I can give him that as an excuse. But it was one of his worst games in a while. For the second goal, definitely. He was trying to remember, it was a bit all over the place for the second goal. He tried to cut out what had happened, and it was just poor, honestly. And Romero, I don't think gets any better rating from me. I had a few people afterwards when I saw my ratings for them kind of saying, Romero was the best of the back three. Romero wasn't the best at anything. And I'm a huge Romero fan. I think he's going to be one of the best defenders in the Premier League eventually. Last night, nope. With Man United were quite brazen almost before the game. David De Gea came out and said, our instructions are to press them high on the pitch. That's what we're going to do. He was essentially telling the Spurs what to do, what they were about to have happen to them. And in that pressing situation, Romero is meant to be the guy that can either surge past a challenge or he can pass around it or whatever. He's got that ability. Dyer to an extent as well, but Romero's got a bit of both. And he just couldn't do it. He was just poor in possession. And I felt that every time he got himself out of position, He tried to do the worst of Romero, which are these lunging challenges, rather than the well-timed aggressive ones, like lunging, slightly reckless tackles. And either one of two things happen. He gives away a silly foul, or he misses the ball completely, and he's left with a huge gap in behind him, which they can kind of run into. And it just showed that little reckless edge still hasn't been curbed. Curb your enthusiasm, Christian. Please do the bad kind of enthusiasm. Not the Larry David excellent kind of enthusiasm. Romero was really, really disappointed with, and we've seen little elements of him coming back to his old self, but I still don't think we're seeing the Christian Romero of last season fully yet. I don't think we are. Ironically, I think last season it was after his injury where he came back and was fantastic, whereas this time I think he's come back from an injury and hasn't really looked the same yet. I'm sure he will, but yeah, not great. Ben Davies, I thought Ben Davies was the most composed of the three in his defending, but in his passing, he was awful. I got his stat. He got the lowest pass success rate at the back three at 76.8%, which may have been that he was trying to get things moving up the pitch, so maybe played more risky balls, but that's a poor figure for a player in the back three. That's not good at all. And obviously, with hindsight, makes you wonder why Clement Longley maybe didn't get the nod in that role, because if you're going to have to pass around the pressing thing, the Frenchman obviously is very good at passing. We know that. Davies, let's be honest, was unfortunate with Fred's goal. There's not really... That's one of those things he's tried to get in the way of it. That's just bad luck. But, back three, poor as a unit, and that's probably Spurs... tight with Longley maybe, but you would say that's the back three of choice for Conte, and they've played so much as a unit and they looked all over the shop. Ahead of them, Yves Bissouma kind of was playing. He wasn't always in the anchorman role. In the recent 3-5-2s, he's been very much sat there in the anchorman role, whereas they slightly rotated who was going to sit back yesterday. But Bissouma didn't do his chances much good at all, or the 3-5-2 formation. He probably had one of the heaviest touches yesterday on countless occasions. Just a guy with so much talent and ability to keep the ball. Just honestly, there were so many times when he'd take the ball and you think, oh, he's going to surge up the pitch, and he'd just take this touch that would send it miles forward to make it so much easier for a Man United player to come and get it. Yeah, I was really disappointed with Bissouma, but it's early days for him, so I can't really go too hard on him. He was just quite ponderous and obviously had those heavy touches. He will get better, of course. But I'm going to go a bit tough, I think, on Pierre-Emile. Having said last video that I do think he's Spurs' best player of the season so far, he was one of their worst players last night. And I've got to be honest. Like I've said, I can think a player isn't very good, but I will praise them if they play well. And likewise, if a player I feel has been excellent over a season, if he has a bad game, I will say they've had a bad game. Højbjerg was awful. He was like running around like a headless chicken at sometimes. He didn't know what to do at moments. When he did have the ball, he would give it away countless times. Very, very, very poor on the ball. We had 3 key moments of bad control, like I said earlier, in attacking situations, which handed them the ball. Second goal for United again, he was all over the shop for that one as well, not really getting in the way at all. It's the second goal was just a horror show when you just watch it back. It was like missed challenges, clearances, tackles, and just kind of rebounded into Fernandez's path, and obviously curled home a lovely finish, but it should never have been allowed to get to that scenario. And Bentancur, I don't think Bentancur was much better, if at all. He's normally the composed one, and I felt that his passing was really sloppy or hesitant. 85.4% is passing success, which was very low for the midfield. That was about 5% lower than Bissouma's and 10% lower than Højbjerg's. It was, not good at all. Having those 3 midfielders should allow Bentancur and Højbjerg especially to get up the pitch, like we saw them do to devastating effect against Everton. But if you're going to use the ball as poorly as they did, you're essentially rendering yourself redundant. And this is the issue as well with the wing-backs not really creating masses. There's no creativity come from anywhere, and that's why it was so turgid and poor to watch. There was one point when Conte got really angry with Bentancur being really hesitant on the ball, and he kind of shouted in Italian, pass the ball, pass the ball. And then he shouted a word at him that, how do I put it? Loosely translated into English, it's a word that rhymes with thickhead. You can probably guess what I'm talking about. And to be Bentancur didn't hold back either. He had a proper pot back. And bearing in mind, in the week, Bentancur had said, there was an interview I think he did with Sky where he was saying just how amazing Conte was and what a great motivator and everything. I'm not entirely sure that was the motivation he was looking for in that moment, but you could just tell how frustrated Conte was. Conte was quite funny on the touchline, actually, in terms of there were times when, they have their brick dugouts, don't they? There were times when he went off and back into the dugout, away from the pitch, which is unlike him. It's almost like I say, almost like he felt defeated as well. Let's be honest, he was still on the touchline the majority of the time in the dugout, but there were times he went back, and you rarely see him even doing that for most games. Normally just standing up. It's like an Energizer Bunny going up and down. So Bentancur not good at all. Conte will get criticised by having what essentially was like a block of 6 players in the middle of that pitch. But ultimately, as I said earlier, we don't know what they were meant to do with the ball because everything they did was so poor when they got the ball. Pretty much all of that block of 6 just wasted it when it came to them. And I just couldn't help but, you saw at the start of the match, he as they were walking out, Eriksen was walking alongside him and Conte went over to him, put a massive, big kind of arm around him. And they were chatting away and laughing and smiling. And I just couldn't help myself afterwards but think what that midfield 3 would have looked like with a Christian Eriksen type in it. Conte won the Serie A title with Inter because the second half of the season, he put Eriksen in that midfield trio and it just worked a treat. Because Eriksen obviously was a hard worker, but he also had that guile and the ability to play the ball through and create chances or do the pre-assist that got other people into good scenarios. And this is the issue with Bissouma, Bentancur and Højbjerg, is that they're all a bit much of a muchness. Yes, they've adapted, some of them, especially Højbjerg, to being a bit more of an attacking player, getting goals and assists, but that's not their natural role. Whereas someone like Eriksen, and Conte was asked, before the game, he heard me back in the summer saying about what happened with Højbjerg, with Eriksen, and he admitted in the press conference essentially that Spurs had also tried to get him. And for one reason or another, it didn't happen. And he would have fitted in like a glove into that. Whenever they would play the 3-5-2, he would have been superb in that 3-5-2 as well. And I also think he would have worked in the 3-4-3 because he's that adaptable, really, Eriksen, that he could have either played, probably in one of the... Because that's the thing. Those winger roles, but they're not winger roles, they're number 10 roles, and I think that would have also suited Eriksen, who can pull out to the flank if need be. So, yes, I wasn't happy with midfield 3, I wasn't happy with the back 3. And in attack, essentially Man United on the night were everything in attack that Spurs wanted to be. Because this is the thing, I mustn't, don't, all this whinging about Spurs mustn't detract from the fact that Man United were excellent. They were really good. Their attacking was superb. They just swept forward in numbers, and it was really great to watch. And the fact that it's all come from Erik ten Hag, there's a big old dose of irony, because, of course, Ten Hag, you would have heard me back in those difficult days of talking about Spurs management farce, their search to find a new manager. Ten Hag was a very strong contender to take over. I still wonder, looking back, if Spurs had pushed that a little bit harder, I think they could have got Ten Hag. Instead, we got the incredible ill-fated reign of Nuno Espirito Santo. And you watch, United play like that. And Ten Hag had a difficult job to take on. We saw in the early weeks what a kind of a mess he had to deal with. But he's gone in there, and to be fair to him, he's been stronger than I expected, or whether he's just got better backing as well behind the scenes, I don't know. But he's essentially laid his marker down. And last night was probably the best example thus far of seeing his imprint on that team. It's quite various young players in there. There's a verve, a hunger, there's incisive play. It's the kind of play that the Spurs fans there have wanted to see from their own team. It just gave you that little moment of, I wonder what Spurs football would have been like under Ten Hag. But don't get me wrong, Conte is one of the world's best coaches. He is. There's no kind of doing down at what he is, and he has won trophies galore. But just for that moment, you just wondered what Ten Hag would have been like as Spurs boss. Because Spurs players, look, they're attackers. Because of the lack of service coming into them, everything they did, Kane and Son, needed to be on point. And it wasn't. They both had poor games for me. Kane had a couple of lovely balls out to Matt Doherty. One of them especially was just, it was cut just beautifully. The way he hit it was technically incredible. But after that, everything he did, it was just failed, really. A lot of his stuff. I mean, 59.1% pass success rate, which was the lowest on the pitch by a long, long way, apart from David De Gea in the United goal, who was 53.1%. I'm presuming that's because he must have hit long kicks a lot that weren't going anywhere. But I'll always say this about Kane. He's got the quality to take games by the scruff of the neck, because he's got that ability to come back and create. He can use his strength to create chances for himself and others. But just apart from a couple of shots, he just faded into the background. He really didn't put himself around in this game. And let's be honest, they've just had a Ballon d'Or where Sonny was 11th, which I think is the highest. I'm sure someone said it was the highest position for an Asian player, which is incredible. It's kind of a historic thing for him. And I think Kane was 21st, 24th. I can't remember exactly where he was, maybe 21st. So these are two of the best. These are two world-class strikers. They are two of the best in the Premier League. But they didn't look it. They didn't look it at all on this night. They just faded. They were quiet. They shrunk almost from the game. Like I said, with Højbjerg, Kane had 3 moments where he gave the ball away with poor touches in attacking areas. Sonny only had 2. I say only. He had 2 moments like that. Sonny had a better pass success rate, 80.8%. He played 2 key passes compared to Kane's 1. But he was also anonymous for long periods of the game. And unusually for Sonny, he didn't make a single dribble. When he got the ball, didn't attempt to really go with it either. Kane, I think, had a couple of dribbles he attempted, but poor. Sonny and Kane, this is a team. This is a duo that we've seen them win games on their own. They've essentially, done bits of magic between the two of them. They couldn't muster any kind of real enthusiasm, I felt, almost for it. And look, there was one moment I think Sonny will look back on, and I think he'll be quite. I'm sure it will be a few moments, like all the players will, but I thought there was one moment I think he'll watch back today and he'll have felt disappointed with himself. And what it was, look, Sonny is not a man who jumps for headers really, as in really puts himself about. I know he's not. That's just not his game. That's not really what he does. But there was this moment in the build-up to the second goal when the ball went up in the air. I think it was Lisandro Martinez, maybe. There was a moment where he was kind of... It was a 50-50. They both could have gone for it. Sonny was there. Lisandro Martinez was there. But just kind of, unfortunately, we kind of felt, a lot of us in the press box, there was a couple of us said, Sonny's not going to go for that, is he? And he didn't. He kind of almost like shied away from even contesting the ball. And as it was, Martinez headed it on with his powerful header. That was what essentially started all the problems that led to the second goal. Look, don't get me wrong, there were a lot of other players that could have fixed those problems. Højbjerg and Dyer both made mess-ups in the middle as the ball was coming through. Then Romero's tackle was a mess, and it kind of ended up sending the ball back to Fernandes to curl the ball home. But you just wonder if Son had just shown a little bit of desire to jump up and contest that. And he's not a small guy. I feel like he's taller than Martinez, I think. Because Martinez, isn't he quite a smaller centre-back? And even if he hadn't won the ball just to disrupt Martinez's attempt to head it down the pitch, perhaps that would have had a different end product. I don't know. Look, I'm not singling Son out because I think everyone bar Lloris was pants yesterday. Everyone. But I just feel like that is one moment that all of those players will have moments that they'll have watched back today on video. And they'll be like, oh, man, that was awful. Like looking behind their hands, like, I can't believe I did that. And I just feel for Sonny, that was his one. Because, I don't know why he left that as an uncontested header. Because we want to see the players give everything. He may have been frustrated, he may have been tired, whatever it is, but still the base thing should be, like I say, for those travelling fans, is challenging for everything. And yeah, that was a little bit disappointing, that one. A little bit. Then are the wing backs. So the two remaining players in the starting 11 I haven't spoken about yet. Matt Doherty started brightly. Like I say, getting on to the end of those Harry Kane passes. He had one where he cut inside onto his left foot and he kind of hit a shot that curled wide. Didn't really give De Gea any problems. He knew it was going wide. Defensively, he did okay. Doherty had 3 successful tackles, which was more than anyone else in the Spurs team. So he did okay in that respect. But after the really promising display against Everton and a decent-ish display against Brighton, this wasn't the performance he wanted to put in last night. Especially with Emerson completing his suspension. I do worry about the Newcastle game for Doherty and whether, I hope for his sake, that Conte sticks with him, because if he then, let's call it rotation, if he rotates him out of the Premier League side after one not as good performance, it's just, I hope it doesn't really mess up the confidence he was starting to build. And obviously, if he puts in Emerson, I don't think the fans are going to be delighted either. But Emerson will be very fresh compared to Doherty. And we'll see what happens there. On the other side, Perisic, I'm still not seeing the... that's not fair. I'm not going to say I'm not seeing the world-class player, because I do think I've seen glimpses of that. But Conte said to me last week that he's starting to see the Perisic that he knew. And he really saw that, he said, against Everton. I'm struggling to see that consistently yet. For me, he's still looking like a guy coming back from a serious injury and a guy still adapting to a new team, which is fine, which is absolutely as it probably would be expected to be. But yeah, I don't know if Conte's saying that he is the Perisic we all know. I'm not seeing that yet. I think he had a few moments when he got down the left and he was pinging in some crosses, but he was wasteful as anyone else. He had 7 crosses and I think 1, I looked at the stats, found a Spurs player. His pass success rate was 78.1% compared to Doherty's 84.4%, and he also gave the ball away twice with poor touches. I felt Cess was unfortunate not to start, to be honest. I said this before, that every time Conte has had a big match, pretty much, he's played Sessegnon. And Sessegnon has repaid him with good performances. I think it's twice against Man City, twice against Liverpool, maybe against Chelsea as well, possibly as well. And he's always kind of come through for him in these big games. Whereas, yeah, even when he brought him on, yesterday he played him on the right, and it was a bit like, it's just going to have such a little effect on that right-hand side. Whereas with Perisic, should really be able to play on that side. I did feel for Sessegnon. I think that was a little bit tough on him to take that. And I'd imagine he comes in against Newcastle. But with Perisic, it's not there yet for him. His partnerships with everyone. I know we spoke a bit about Sonny and his partnership last week, but I feel like his partnerships with everyone haven't really developed yet. Yeah, hopefully one who will get better and better. But yeah, I haven't seen it yet. I'm not going to say what all the fuss is about, because he's a class player and he's won Champions League, he's won league titles everywhere he's gone. He is class, and Conte says he's one of the world's best as a wing backs. Then that's what he is. I just don't think it's happened yet at Spurs for me. Just more so moments. Jed Spence did get on, got another couple of minutes to his name, and he got to touch the ball. What he actually did was quite a nice little run into the box down the right-hand side. Unfortunately, at the end of it, he cut the ball back and didn't go anywhere. But it just showed that little bit of purpose and desire, which I think was quite important. And he's getting a little reward, I think, for his training improvements as well. You know, these are minutes building up here and there. It is only literally a handful of minutes, but it's showing that he's not been jettisoned. You know, spare a thought for poor Brian Hill, who played really well in that game when he came on. Was it Frankfurt? And has not been seen since. He's had no reward for that good performance whatsoever, which is quite harsh. But there you go. Yeah. Then we've got... So that's the team. I've covered the 11. Then we had the press conference afterwards, which... I used this analogy earlier and I'm going to use it again, or a little thing. So Mrs. Potts, the teapot in Beauty and the Beast, she sang the song, didn't she? Taylor's Old as Time. And for me, a Tale as Old as Time would very much be football managers blaming everyone but themselves after a defeat. And that was pretty much what Conte was doing after the game. After that first answer where he said essentially it was the players struggle in the big games, he pretty much turned his attention to the club and he really sent a not too deeply hidden message to the powers that be, Daniel Levy, whoever you want to say, Paratici, I don't know, whoever he wanted to. We can improve. We need to continue to work, and for sure it is right with the club also to analyse very well why, when we are going to play this type of game, when the level is very high, we are struggling. I repeat, we can work a lot on the pitch, but we need to continue to work in many aspects. So there's a bit more to come which kind of solidifies that, but essentially he's talking about more signings. He wants more signings. I felt his substitutions were strange on the night. Conte does get a little bit of flack about his substitutions. People don't praise him when he does make really good substitutions, which he has in a few of the recent games, and I've tried to highlight that. But when he makes poor substitutions, I will also do that. I felt last night the substitutions were almost a bit like, I don't really trust my bench again. It was one of those. He does this at times, and it was almost, he made 5 substitutions, 3 in the 82nd minute and 2 in the 88th minute. But for me, they weren't, I'm going to change this game. They were like, okay then, game over. Let's rest him and him and him just in case they get any injuries late on. And we'll give him a couple of minutes just to make him feel better. That was all it felt like. It didn't feel like anything other than that. It was, who was it? It was Cess, Lucas and Sanchez to begin with. It was meant to be Skip, and then Cess and Skip changed. And then Skippy and Spence came on right at the end of the game. Which, there's a part of me that wonders, look, would those players, if you'd brought them on at the hour mark, would they have done any worse than the players already on there? Because for me, young players can bring you that hunger and desire on the pitch. I'm not saying bring them all on, but maybe 1 or 2 of them, whether it be a Skippy or a Sessignon or a Spence, whatever, just to give that little bit of impetus. And then sometimes these other more senior players look at them and think, they're putting themselves about. I can't now not do that. And it kind of has this weird inspiring effect, I think, on the rest of the team. I don't see what he was seeing and thinking that he couldn't change the game with what he had. So yeah, I asked him afterwards, essentially, why? Why so late did you make changes? And when you ask that kind of question, because it's quite a common question, it can go one of 2 ways. Manager can get a bit arsey about it, or they can answer it honestly, and thankfully he did the latter, because the arsey questions don't give you anything interesting to work with, whereas this did. So he said, substitutions today with Richarlison and Kulusevski out with injuries were really difficult to try to change the game. Also because Lucas Moura, very well, is recovering from an injury with his tendon. We're trying to keep him in balance, and for this reason we're also going during the training sessions to bring him in the best physical condition, but not to push him a lot, because he took risks like 2 weeks ago to stop himself again. The other solution to the bench today was that we played with 3 midfielders because we had only the 2 strikers. And in this type of game, we have many young players, that this game is difficult for all players, and for the young players, much more difficult. So again, talking about the young players, that's another kind of a little of a dig at the club, at the board, at the transfer window. That, in my opinion, of saying, look, I had another bench full of young players. You want me to be at the top, winning titles, whatever. I can't be bringing on kids into a game where you have experienced players winning the match. Look, he's right in terms of the age. I mean, looking at that Spurs bench, you had 21-year-old Brian Hill, 3 22-year-olds in Sessignon, Spence and Skip, and you got 23-year-old Japhet Tanganga, meaning more than half the players on his bench, yes, were younger players. However, I would point him towards the United starting 11, which had 22-year-old Jadon Sancho, Anthony, also 22. So 2 of the front 3 attackers are 22, and Rashford is 24, which is that's a very young front line. Diogo Dalot as well, 23 years old, and Anthony Elanga came off the bench. He's only 20. So I don't buy the youth thing. I never have. I've always been of the mind that you're good enough, you're old enough. Doesn't matter how old you are. And I think that is what we're seeing with Ten Hag, that he's not scared of using these young... I don't say not scared. He's not worried about using these young players because he trusts them. And this is the weird thing for me, is because I said this before, I feel like Conte trusts Sessegnon. I feel he does. And Skip, I think he does as well. He's just waiting for him to get back to sharpness, but he won't get that without minutes. So yeah, I found all of that a little bit, really, kind of thing. I sound like my neighbour Dave, who always says that, really? You don't know my neighbour Dave, but that is what he sounds like. Yeah, I don't think the age thing is an excuse that can be used. I don't think it excuses the fact that, a strong team of Spurs players, large number who you could count among the best players in the Premier League, were outworked. They were outfought. They were outplayed. Conte was tactically outthought as well by Ten Hag. Obviously, like I say, not helped by the fact that the players were so poor, but also outthought. United were just flooding around Spurs at every opportunity. So I don't think using age or a lack of signings is anything, because that starting 11 put out, that midfield three, whatever I say about them trying to adapt and all that, Basuma's been one of the best midfielders in the Premier League in recent years. Højbjerg has been Spurs' best player of the season so far for me. Bentancur is a 3-time Serie A title winner. They looked like the inferior midfield, and they shouldn't against a midfield of United that, has had its critics as well. So yeah, I don't buy that. It felt like a deflection for me. And look, I don't want to be really down on Conte at all, because look, let's get it straight. There is no doubt that Conte has improved Spurs since he came in for me. Since November, the point haul on its own demonstrates how much he's improved them, and he's improved certain players as well. But I feel he needs to be slightly wary that this narrative that he creates himself, where he always needs better players, it looms almost as large across his career as his trophies do. You look through every club he's been at, and I'm not saying I disagree with him, but it just seems such a constant theme that at every club he's worked at, the answer always seems to be, I want better players. You look at the silverware he's won, and all the fantastic things he does on the training ground as well. But every one of these clubs, you'll be able to find quotes from Antonio Conte at some point saying, I need better players, essentially indirectly, whether it's I need more money spent, or you look at other clubs and what they're spending and we're spending, blah, blah, blah. It's a constant theme throughout his career. And I just feel it does him a disservice, because he's a brilliant coach. On the training ground, honestly, people rave about how he's on the training ground. And I think he almost is creating this narrative around himself that he's a guy that if he doesn't get better players and top players, he can't win things. And I don't think that's the case with him. I do think he's a better coach than even he gives himself credit for. Look, he's taken on a tough task at Spurs, without doubt. It's the toughest one he's probably taken. Sorry, when I say tough, I mean relatively compared to what he's taken on in the past. Because in terms of a sleeping giant, Spurs have been dozing for a while. They've been in a deep sleep. They haven't won, obviously, a league title in 60 years, whereas, obviously, other teams he's taken over, they've won them more recently. And I will feel, there was this... The other thing about the press conference I didn't mention was that when, Ten Hag came in, the room was kind of buzzing. Obviously, he was all excited about what he'd done. He was buoyant. The media were very interested to hear what he had to say. Even the Ronaldo stuff, Cristiano Ronaldo, if you weren't aware, showing his great delight in his teammates' performance by walking off down the tunnel before the game had finished, which I think he's now been dropped from the next match against Chelsea for. But he swerved that, Ten Hag. He was just like, we can talk about that tomorrow. He'd earned that right, I think, with performance to kind of do that. And everything had been focused on him in this press conference. A lot of those journalists in the room were Man United journalists, regulars, all there for the big story, which was United. So when Conte walked in a couple of minutes later, honestly, that was probably the most disinterested room I've ever been in terms of a press conference. It was just me, pretty much. There was a guy, like I said, I think maybe from Sky, who asked a question, and there was me in the front row where I normally sit, going like, Antonio, that kind of thing. And honestly, he probably... Look, managers don't at the best of times want to talk after a defeat. But I'm sure his pride as one of the best managers in the world, who everyone hangs on the word of, walk into a room where, and this is honest, the truth. Most of the journalists didn't even look up. I didn't even feel they bothered to acknowledge that he'd even come in. They were all writing their copy from what Ten Hag had said or what was happening with United. I think it was only 2 or 3 of us put our dictaphones and phones up at the front. Poor Antonio Conte, he's probably looking at it, it's like, oh, it's that Alistair again. That's all it is. Literally, that Alistair in the front row. Alistair, bloody gold. And obviously, and I'm asking questions about, why is this team so scared? Why are you making late subs? We're like, oh, brilliant. That's what I needed as well. It's kind of coming at me with his questions as well. I think that would have hurt his pride, that he had a room that really couldn't give a monkey's about what he was about to say. And that will make him like question like where he's at and all this sort of stuff. But that was more about performance and how poor Spurs were. And there was nothing controversial in the game to get his view on either from the national journalists. There was no red card turning point, VAR decision or whatever, so it didn't really make any difference. Yeah. But to show you how disinterested they were, so the chap asked the first question, I asked a couple, then I thought I'll be polite and I'll let someone else have a chance, and then maybe come back in afterwards. So I kind of paused. Nobody asked a thing. And Spurs press officer went, okay then, right, we'll wrap up, and then went out. I was like, it was like, we did 3 questions, and now it's the press conference. I mean, thankfully, it gave some good long answers. So, anyone that's read my kind of transcript that I always put out from these things, there was enough in there to get stuff from. But I would have liked some more questions. I was a bit surprised that the room were that disinterested that nobody asked him any more. And that, again, just kind of shows almost how irrelevant Spurs were by the end of the game, which is not good at all. It really isn't good at all. He's used to being kind of the centre of attention almost. And yeah, he would not have liked that at all. But do you know what? I think Conte's got his part to play in how irrelevant Spurs became, because all this talk about monsters and, he's made this big deal about how Spurs finishing 4th last season, it was a miracle. It was incredible. It was like the greatest thing that's ever happened. And look, Tottenham fans, we've witnessed Mauricio Pochettino, not that long ago, only a couple of years back, taking Spurs to 3 consecutive top 3 finishes, including a 2nd place. And then the next year, finishing 4th and reaching a Champions League final. So nobody's going to be sold on this narrative that, oh, well done, little Tottenham. Congratulations, that's fantastic that you're up there fighting with the big boys, because Poch did all that. He did all that, and I'd probably say with less backing than Conte's had. Conte's had 9 players in the 2 windows he's been at, and not for an inconsiderable amount. Look, I know people will moan still that there should have been more, but you total up those transfer fees, and then you probably also add on what Kulusevski will cost when Spurs pay for him. He's had a lot of backing, and Pochettino's managed to do what he did with, I'd say, less in terms of the average amount spent on his players as well. I don't think that's going to wash. I don't think he should keep going down that line for me. Look, I'm no public relations expert or anyone that would tell him how to speak afterwards, but I think if he keeps going down it, do you know what it feels like to me? Do you remember, was it Harry Redknapp said they never had it so good or something like that? I can't remember what it was. I could be doing him disservice, could be paraphrased, I don't know. But it's got those kind of vibes. And I noticed back then running the Redknapp, a lot of Spurs fans would start to say, like, when things start to go wrong, oh yeah, but we've never had it this good and all that sort of stuff. And I feel like if Conte goes down that road, then he ends up getting less patience when performances aren't great and the football's not great and things like that. Not making out Spurs some like promoted side or anything that, taking on these monsters. It's just not the case. It's really not. And look, don't get me wrong, there is still the question to be had whether Conte was backed enough. That's definitely there to be had. I said myself when the transfer window ended, I didn't feel that the squad was as complete as it could have been. And I think the biggest glaring issue we found is with that lack of another attacking creative midfielder, because we're seeing how crucial Dejan Kulusevski is. The 3-5-3 is made by Kulusevski's presence. And he can probably also play in a 3-5-2 as a wing-back if needed as well. Or maybe even as an advanced playmaker within the midfield three. You know, he says he's number 10, perhaps. He could even play that as well. So not having someone that can step in for Kulusevski, I think, is the biggest issue where they're missing a rotation person for me, as well as Kane, probably. Although you could argue Richarlison could do that. But I don't feel Richarlison is a replacement for Kulusevski. Not in any way for me. A different kind of player. And yeah, you know, he wants the title. Of course he does. He doesn't just want to aim for the top four. That's understandable. But with the Premier League as it is, with, you know, I'd say Monster is the one I'd be fine with Manchester City being called, because any team that can be so dominant last season and then add Haaland to their ranks, that is a monster. Of course it is. But I don't think you can just apply that to everyone willy-nilly in the league. I don't think that really is the case at all. Because technically some other teams might have felt that Spurs were a bit of a monster in terms of becoming a regular top 4 team for 4 years or so. So, yeah, I'm not having that. I'm not having that at all. And look, January is going to come along. We know that they need more investment. I get the impression Spurs know that as well. And they need to be intelligent signings. They need to be signings. They need to be signings for the now. Otherwise, we're going to hear about it forever from Conte. They need to be signings for the now anyway. Because, look, this is the other thing actually that annoys me about the small club thing, is that Spurs, I feel rightly, will look at what Conte is saying, but then they will look at that and say, but, you know, Newcastle have just come away from there having got a point. Brighton went there and won. Man City, of course, went there, but they scored 6 goals there. You know, Ten Hag's football imprint is definitely being felt on that team and they are growing with it. But Old Trafford has not been a fortress. You know, like Tottenham Hotspur Stadium, yes, has been a fortress this season. Was it 10 wins in a row in all competitions? United and Old Trafford has not been the same. So they weren't going to this, you know, daunting, awful, terrible place to go and play football. Other teams have gone there and they've got results. And other teams have beaten United or drawn with United this season, which is why United are below Tottenham in the table. This is what I can't stress enough. They're not going to a monster above them at all. And, you know, Spurs have got this run of games now, so which Liverpool aside, they'll be favourites for, as in not the Liverpool game, the other ones. So they got, obviously, Newcastle coming on Sunday, Sporting coming on Wednesday, then trips to Newcastle and Marseille, that Liverpool game at home, and then matches against Forest away in the Cup and Leeds United at home. So 3 of the next 4 Premier League weekends are at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. This is my prediction, only a prediction, and it could go wrong. On paper, barring a collapse, Spurs should really, come the winter break for the World Cup, maybe even still be 3rd, possibly 4th. With that run of games, if they do what they're meant to do, they should be. Even if you allow for, you know, potentially dropping points against Liverpool or one or another, they should still be up there. And I think that's when Spurs will regroup in that winter. They'll decide, Conte and Spurs have to decide kind of exactly what comes next in this second half of the season. Conte, of course, will want the validation of what he's doing, not only obviously contract-wise, but also in terms of transfers and what comes next and how strong they go. In the transfer market, because it will be a different transfer market. That World Cup will make sure it's a different one, and everyone will spend money. And you know, but likewise, as well as this not very subtle message to Daniel Levy from Conte, and with him wanting more off the pitch from Spurs, I think the fans will want more on it as well. And I think that's part of his duty as well, is to look. At some point, if he's brought this up, he will say, probably I think Mourinho said similar, yeah, great, you've had your fantasy football for decades. How many trophies have you won out of it? That's fair. It is a fair point. But there are managers that have proved that you can do both. And I've said this and I will say it again and again and again. The Conte football is not boring football when it works. When it has the wing-backs flying down and creating chances, when it has one of the central midfielders also pushing up, and when it has the 3-4-3 with 3 players up there and the likes of Kulusevski creating, Spurs will create lots of chances, and they have in some games. And I still feel they haven't clicked yet, and Kulusevski's injury has been a biggie. But, you know, they can be better on the pitch. And I feel They need to rid themselves really of this whole fear factor rubbish about the monsters, who other teams seem to be able to vanquish these monsters and pick up points against. Look, Conte was named 4th, I saw, in the top coaches in the world in 442's list this week that they did. And, last year he brought a weaker squad than I'd say he has now into 4th place in the Premier League. It wasn't a miracle. It was really good coaching. Obviously, Arsenal messing up as well. But it was really good coaching, and he took them on a terrific run of form. And obviously helped a little bit by the 1 game a week thing towards the end as well. But, I do feel that Spurs are far better than he makes out they are. And it's down to him to kind of use this undoubted coaching ability he has to squeeze every last drop out of these players, because I think he can. I really think he can. Daniel Levy has to do his bit. He has to ensure there are funds for new arrivals in January, of course. And Spurs can have a strong second half to the season. But I do feel like Conte has to also play his part in instilling a belief in these players that they can go out there and beat whoever they want to beat. Because, he may be saying this privately, but if the public message is about kind of monsters and everyone else being better, and I know some fans will say this is a kind of realism thing. For me, I don't know. Having a public voice that is kind of doubting where Spurs are at, I think it allows players to have excuses for their performances. Oh, we're not going to beat them anyway. I just feel it has, and I've never liked it when other managers have done it as well. And Poch used to do it as well. Giving praise some Poch some praise in this. But he's also in the past, he used to do similar. He would talk about other clubs being far better and in better positions. And I didn't always agree with that mentality of it either. Look, Conte is happy and settled at Tottenham. As I've said last week, nothing changes with one bad result. But he is an emotional man. And this night at Old Trafford needs to serve as a lesson for everyone. And that includes him as well, I think. Maybe also for us, the media and the fans as well, for various things we want, maybe aren't always the best thing in every single game. On that, I do think the 3-5-2 and 3-4-3, they are. I think they're going to be really helpful in terms of changing them up for different games, changing them within games. So that's fine, but obviously we probably shouldn't demand that we see a certain formation in certain games, because maybe we don't know as much as we think we do, and that includes me, very much so. But yeah, nights like last night need to serve as, how do I put this? That lesson, rather than a vessel for him to just hammer home a point, a consistent message that he's said throughout his career about needing better options, better players for the now, all of this. Honestly, new arrivals are needed. But Conte is so much better as a coach than I think he's given himself credit for. And I think his Tottenham team are now. Honestly, that he can get more out of them. And that's saying something for a team in third. I think he can get more out of them. But there you go. Right, before I head off, I'm going to do a little loan roundup very quickly, because someone said in the comments last week that I hadn't had one for a little while. And that's absolutely right. So very quickly rattling through it. Destiny Udogie. 2 games for Udinese this week. 83 minutes for them against Lazio. Clean sheet, 0-0 draw. Wednesday night, I've got this written down here somewhere. Suffered defeat, and he's out of the Italian Cup. 3-2 loss at home against Monza. He came on at half-time, but he wasn't able to prevent that. Joe Rodon didn't play. He was suspended for the game against Lyon. That Rennes did win 3-2. He got a red card late on in the 3-0 win against Nantes, where, he was one of those professional fouls, last man kind of fouls, where he probably with 3-0 up didn't need to do it, but Rennes managed to win without him. They're flying high, I tell you. They're 5th place in the table, just 2 defeats from their 11 games. Troy Parrott, if you're not aware, sad kind of news for him, obviously. Strange, he scored his first championship goal a couple of weeks ago, coming off the bench, winning goal against Norwich for Preston. In the celebrations, he injured himself, had a really bad hamstring injury. This week he put a photo of himself up on Instagram, had the surgery, it's been successful. He put the caption up, hamstring surgery went well, road to recovery starts now, and I'll be doing everything in my power to be back doing what I love ASAP. God gives the toughest challenges to the toughest people. So the expectation is that he's going to be back after the World Cup. Dane Scarlett got another 68 minutes to his name. Portsmouth's 3-0 defeat to Charlton on Monday. He hasn't scored since that little burst of goals he had about, was it 5-6 weeks ago? But coach is still very happy with him, and he is really developing and building and getting used to senior football, so that's great. Tongi Ndembele has been making progress at Napoli as well. Back-to-back league starts for him. He got 71 minutes, 3-2 victory at home against Bologna. He's quite a busy display. Various stats in there. Pass success rate of 89.4. 4 shots a goal, 2 key passes, 1 aerial duel, 1 as well. Busy time for him. Harry Winks, unfortunately, still not appeared yet for Sampdoria. He's had this ankle problem. It's only allowed him to have 1 training session with the group. Sampdoria just kind of got him listed as unavailable at the moment for games, and there has been some reports, whether it's valid or not, some reports that Sampdoria might even try and cut his loan short in January, which is a strange one because obviously I think they had an option in there to sign him. I think I remember correctly. I can't remember now. There's so many loans towards the end. So yeah, 11 games and he hasn't played a single one yet, so not good for him. Sergio Reguilon hasn't played for Atletico Madrid yet either. He had a groin issue. He had surgery on that, so he's still not back to playing yet either. He'll be hoping to get back. You'd imagine. I think it was October. They thought originally he was going to be back. So whether that is towards the end of this month or not, we'll see. Giovanni Lo Celso, he has been playing regularly, but he did miss Villarreal's game against Osasuna. 2-0 win on Monday, and he is a doubt for they're playing Barcelona actually tonight. He may be back in, I don't know. Alfie Whiteman. How can I forget Alfie Whiteman? Poor old Alfie had a bad knock to his head a few weeks back, got concussion, was out obviously for the protocol time, but since he's come back the last couple of games, he's been on the bench. Whether they're easing him back in or not, Degerfors, the Swedish team he plays for. He was due to play tonight against Gothenburg, so I'm not entirely sure whether he's about to be in the team or not. But that's the loan roundup. 9 players, varying amounts of game time. Some of them not playing at all. Some of them making good progress. I'll give you an update on those as they go on. Hopefully some good news for a fair few of those in the coming weeks, you'd hope as well. Right, Newcastle up next. Newcastle, for me, is the perfect game, I think, for Spurs to have next because Newcastle have been playing very well. They're in 6th place. They've only lost 1 game, which means Spurs can't kind of coast into this game thinking, oh, well, at least it'll be easier than United. This is going to be a tough game. This is not going to be like Newcastle kind of getting tonked, was it 5-1 at Tottenham Hotspur Stadium last season. This is going to be a very different game. Newcastle they're starting to build towards where they're going to be a bit of a financial monster, as Conte calls them. So I'm quite happy that this is the game they've got rather than the more simpler one where they might get complacent in. They can't afford to get complacent in this match, otherwise it could be a bit of a disastrous game. Press conference tomorrow from Conte. Maybe find out a bit of the latest on Kulusevski because he didn't actually rule him out ahead of the Everton game. It was a bit like, I don't know. Sorry, not Everton. United game. So we'll see where he's at with his return to fitness as well and whether there's any fresh ones. Richarlison was out for 2 weeks, he said. Obviously, thankfully, not going to miss the World Cup. So 2 weeks from the injury. So obviously a bit too soon for him probably right now with his calf injury. But please be better, Tottenham. Please be better on Sunday. Really, really need a good performance on Sunday. I think everyone needs to get back into the positive dimension. 3 wins in a row, then to have that awful performance at Old Trafford. Don't let that knock them off the rails. Now they've got to really kind of crack back onto where they were. Because like I say, I do feel like there's this little run of games now where they can build a really strong foundation pre-World Cup. And I don't think that changes just because of last night. It really shouldn't. But there you go. Right, I'm going to head off just as my voice sounds like it's about to go. Rubbish night, but it doesn't need to define Tottenham. And it shouldn't be doom and gloom because they are still in a good position in the Premier League, good position in the Champions League, Carabao Cup to come. There's a lot to do in this season and a lot more twists and turns to come. So, yeah, I know we like to kind of, the screen painting kind of thing when it all goes wrong. But, yeah, like I say, Conte is a brilliant coach. And Spurs have got far better players than he often kind of gives Spurs credit for. So let's see how they respond to this before I start moaning in the next video. Hopefully I don't have to. So yeah, right, I'm going to head off now for my evening. Yeah, as always, stay safe, stay healthy, look after yourselves, and I shall catch you later. Goodbye.